Most people who know anything about Hello Engineer have seen the giant robot mech in the trailer, yet most people have never actually seen it in-game. And I wish I could say that it was a flawless experience, but almost like it's on brand, that's not meant to happen. What went wrong with Hello Neighbor is an interesting story about a game receiving an insane amount of hype and attention only for it to subvert expectations, make Markiplier go insane, and provide the neediest map pack lure ever seen. Minus the fact that most people prefer the alphas over the full release, Hello Neighbor as a brand, as a franchise, even to this day has proven to be very successful. And of course, out of that success came a few spin-offs, one of the strangest ones being this, Hello Engineer. Because as we'll see, this game is what happens when you have a fun concept, but instead of letting it be its own thing, you slap on a popular IP in the hope to attract an already established audience, while also creating an unnecessary roadblock that turned out to be unviable anyway. I think this top review has the best line for it. I got no idea why this game exists, to be honest. And after looking at it ourselves, we know why it exists. It didn't matter what negativity the original game had at the time. For all the weird bugs, the convoluted puzzles, the wonky neighbor AI, the frustrating level design, what tinyBuild had on their hands was the next big thing, and they wanted to make the most of it. In July 2020, an article came out that confirmed about 21 million sales for just the books and general merchandise alone. This article also came out around about the time when tinyBuild acquired Dynamic Pixels, the developers behind the game, who eventually became Eerie Guest Studios in the process. tinyBuild saw an opportunity and wanted to invest a further 15 million into the franchise as part of their extended effort to expand it through cross-media, which explains why there was a board game at one point, and I think a big part to this decision was how popular their test pilot to their cartoon series was. I mean, even back then, it got millions of views. Prior to this news, there were already two spin-offs. Hide and Seek, that was a bit rough around the edges, but well received by fans, and then Secret Neighbor, the rather successful multiplayer 5v1 traitor game that also had a notable ARG for fans to solve, the Mayak event, where people discovered a locked zip file that required a long code to unlock, and inside it contained a new game called Hello Guest that basically turned into Hello Neighbor 2. The devs love doing this kind of stuff, dropping hints and breadcrumbs that engage the community to figure something out. The hint towards Hello Engineer was a bit more on the nose, with a video simply uploaded to tinyBuild's channel titled Physics Joints Test, Unannounced Neighbor Project.mp4. The video on its own didn't gain that much attention, and it was uploaded in February 2019, so something was clearly in the works before the acquisition. And in terms of additional news for the game, that would pretty much be it for now. There wasn't that much noise about it at the time. The only thing people knew at the time was that there was going to be something about engineering at some point. It wasn't till over a year later in October 2020 where it became official and Hello Engineer secured its name with a teaser trailer. Straight off the bat, it promoted itself as a co-op game where you make vehicles out of junk that you need to scavenge for to overcome challenges. But watch out, because of course the Hello Neighbor made a spider neighbor for some reason. They didn't give an exact date for when it would come out, but they did say it would come out sometime in 2021, and to be fair, it didn't look too bad. I mean, even the possibility of flying about with jets looked fun. We'll see it in more detail later, but the general concept for the game is simple. You have a set of unique obstacles to overcome, and like figuring out a puzzle, you need to engineer something that can help you get to the finish line. It doesn't actually matter how you get there, you just need to get to the finish line in your vehicle. It's kind of like one of those addictive Lego videos where there's an increasingly large gap to cross and what was once a car becomes a car, but with a zip line. It's that general concept turned into a game. The whole setup for it is that you and your friends are a part of an inventors club, and you decide to sneak into the abandoned amusement park to steal materials to enter the state engineering contest. But of course, in the process, you find yourself trapped in the park with the neighbor and have to find a way to escape using your engineering skills. They went with the whole your imagination is the limit approach, and by the looks of it, you could take your creations pretty far. Multiplayer was one of the largest selling points for the game because with it, you could collaborate and have your friends control parts of your vehicle, or you could go full robot wars in the PvP arena. Of course, with that, there was also sandbox, and that's a big selling point, and For a relatively basic engineering game, it looked alright. However, there was a bit of a problem with all of this, because for some reason, it was going to be a Stadia exclusive, and if you know anything about Stadia, you know where this is going. Stadia was Google's cloud gaming platform launched in late 2019 that allowed people to stream games, meaning that you don't have to have a high-spec PC to play demanding titles. It's not an entirely new concept. I mean, I remember streaming BioShock to my PS Vita back in the day, but with Stadia, you could technically, and I found footage of this, play Red Dead Redemption 2 on a Chromebook. One of the main problems with the platform is that it was streaming only, so no local downloads. You needed to be connected to Wi-Fi to play the games you paid for, which of course isn't a good thing, and after mentioning Sony in this script, DRM seems to be the path they want to take. Anyway, as we know, Hello Engineer was marketed as a co-op game, so fair enough. However, Hello Neighbor has always been PC first, with console ports included. So locking this new game into a new platform away from other platforms that people are already familiar with was clearly going to alienate a lot of the core audience. You're literally forcing your fans, your diehard fans, to sign up to a whole new thing. It's also not hard to believe that TinyBuild probably struck some kind of deal with Google to get more people onto the Stadia. Otherwise, why would they make it exclusive? There may have already been 2 spin-offs before this, but at least they both had a common theme that's core to what Hello Neighbor is, which is a puzzle game where you basically play cat and mouse. Hide and seek was that, and so was Secret Neighbor, with the whole concept of you trying to complete objectives while one person plays as a traitor to take out the entire team before you do. It's not horror, but it is meant to be creepy. The whole fun of it is the chase, the scare of getting caught. Hello Engineer alluded to this in some way, yet rightly so, people weren't too sure how or why the neighbor was making mechs in the first place. You can see by the top comments that people got the impression TinyBuild were just slapping the IP on anything to increase its appeal. The game very much had that scrap mechanic vibe to it, like somebody on the team looked at that game and said, "What if Neighbor?" However, it was still interesting to see them take the IP in a different direction. On the 28th of January 2021, they began taking applications for the closed beta test, ending applications on the 8th of February. I couldn't find much noise about it back then or what anyone's opinion was about the game, but it did come to early access later in June because Stadia also had some form of early access and the base cost was $20. And while in early access, it did see some kind of reviews, some kind of coverage. In summary, considering its status, it was already a serviceable game. It wasn't entirely broken or that rough around the edges, just a bit wonky and required some polish. Overall, it looked and played alright. Even by this point, they made sure to include a proper onboarding system that teaches the player level by level how to modify and build vehicles to overcome the obstacles. Apparently playing it on controller was a bit awkward as mentioned in this review, but the most worrying thing was that multiplayer had no matchmaking. It was invite only, so the only way to actually play with someone was to drag a friend onto Stadia with you. Now, early access didn't last for too long before people could play the full release in October 2021. You could either pay the full price to own it, or if you were a Stadia Pro member, you could just claim it because Pro members had access to a roster of claimable games that seemed to cycle and grow as time went on. Which, to be fair, the Pro membership did work in its benefit because you could technically just play it for a month as well as others for $10 rather than pay the full price. Anyway, how was this game received? Well, in the YouTube comments, it's about the same thing as before, just this time, more TF2 jokes. But the thing is, it's actually really hard to find any reviews or opinions about the game back then, and that on its own says a lot. For what I did find, it was basically mixed, and apparently the game was beatable in about 5 hours with only 3 achievements to collect. We'll come back to the review side of things soon because nothing really changed, but around this time, for the Stadia, things were about to take a turn for the worse. You see, there's a reason why not too many people talk about this game, or at least talked about it back then, and it is because Stadia didn't pull the numbers that Google were hoping for. As a platform, the Stadia just wasn't doing well, and in February 2021, Google had already shut down its in-house game development division after failing to hit its targets, apparently missing its monthly active user goal by hundreds of thousands. Google put a lot of money into this, and originally they were going to be developing their own games, but decided not to as interest was clearly way lower than expected. Of course, it didn't get better as time went on, and it made less sense for Google to keep going. It just never quite caught on. For Hello Engineer specifically, it sat on the market with apparently one update till it was taken off the roster of claimable games in June 2022. Then about 3 months later, on the 28th of September, Google announced the inevitable shutdown of Stadia, and on the website today you can see that it shut down on the 18th of January 2023. Although this wasn't great news in general for many other games, Hello Engineer being exclusive made this news far more apocalyptic. Thankfully they didn't just sit there and sink with the ship, because in December 2022 they announced that it was finally coming to Steam. For the sake of preserving a game, it's good news all round, and it would have been sad to see it go regardless of opinion. The demo came to Steam in January 2023, and then the full release came out much later in August. This time there was a much larger pool of players to actually play the game, and unsurprisingly, it still got mixed reviews. After playing it myself, I can see why someone would say that the idea is 10 out of 10 and the realization is minus 45 out of 10. Generally speaking, the game as a whole is decent enough as an entry point to engineering type games. It's not overly complicated to learn how the components work, the levels aren't too boring, and it can take a few hours to get through the main story. For the price, I wouldn't say it's a complete rip-off, however, it does feel unfinished, especially towards the end. Making a functional vehicle isn't hard, and the first few levels do well to introduce the building system. You also unlock blueprints over time, so you're not stuck trying to rebuild the same core components every level, and you can even save your builds to easily spawn them in later. These are some pretty nice features. Although with that being said, to be honest, the actual building process doesn't feel as intuitive as it should do. Now, just for context, I was using an Xbox controller for this because controllers are used in their own footage, the Stadia had its own controller too, and the reviews I could find complained that using one was a bit awkward, so I wanted to put that to the test. And I can kind of see why, because this game requires some precision to connect and place things. So to help with that, they added auto-aim, or some kind of auto-aim functionality that does help, but you will find yourself fighting against it at times, and I couldn't find any way to turn it off. So if you want to play the game with a controller and that kind of thing annoys you, tough luck. Also, it's insane to see how low the default turning speed is. I think they did this to compensate for the amount of precision you're going to need when playing this game, but besides that, using a controller wasn't too bad. However, what threw me off the most were some annoying things about the actual building system. For one example, here's me trying to resize something. You can see that the arrows indicate direction. In my case, moving the joystick left reduces the length and moving it right increases it. Simple enough to understand, but if you were to start resizing the same object from the other side, you may instinctively think that moving the joystick right will decrease the length and left will increase it. Well, no, that doesn't happen. In fact, the opposite happens because the controls for increasing or decreasing don't change. The reason why this is confusing and easy to forget is because the game always shows you the controls to press as you're doing stuff. You can see it right here. So when you're building something and passively using the controls, it's easy to forget that the arrows don't actually mean anything, and you kind of sit there feeling confused, almost like you don't really trust the buttons you're pressing. It's a similar thing with rotating an object. You can see here that you can choose the axis to rotate it on, but there's nothing to intuitively tell you which way you're going to rotate it. Again, it's one of those things that breaks the connection between you and the game. When building something, you're going to be wanting to resize stuff and rotate stuff all the time. The controls for any game are meant to be a passive connection between you, the player, and the game itself. So when you have things like this that throw you off every now and then, it breaks that. It breaks that trust in the control system. It's very easy to look at this as a viewer and say, well, that's just user error, that's just your fault. But when you're focusing on building something, from a user experience design perspective, they didn't quite hit the nail on the head here, and I can see why this can annoy people. Now, when it comes to the rest of the game, the controls are the least of this game's problems, because here's the thing. It's a really fun concept, and I love testing out different builds, especially later. However, the payoff for completing each level felt rather dry. Most levels are way too short and not really challenging enough, at least in the way that it requires some actual thought. In the beginning, you had some pretty cool problems to solve, like making some kind of thing to hang off roller coasters with. But then after that, most of the levels just revolved around going through mud that doesn't even react to your presence, going up a hill, going over some rocks, or dodging the odd hazard every now and then. To be fair, not all of the tracks were that boring to get past, and there were quite a few problems that required specific solutions. Although that being said, I feel like there wasn't as much creativity behind them as there could have been. Now, they did introduce TNT at some point, which was pretty cool. I mean, I like the idea of picking up some TNT and having to take it to a specific area to open up a passageway, yet there was nothing really there that pushed me to think outside of the box. I mean, later on when you unlock jet engines for the first time, you have this level where you've got to go up this ramp and over these planets to get to the finish line. It looks like it requires some kind of skill, some kind of craft that can maneuver mid-air. Originally, I tried to make some kind of drone, some sort of flying craft, but that didn't really pan out. But it turns out that I didn't even need to do that. I didn't even need to think that hard about this, because with a jet engine, you don't just accelerate, you can also reverse, which as you can see basically means I can cheese it. The only thing you're scored on in this game is if you can make it to the finish line in the vehicle and also how much time it takes you to get there. That's it. There are no collectibles along the way. There's no reason to create something specific just to get all the secrets. Somehow they forgot to gamify their own game, and it's really sad to see because it's stuff like that. Even just trying to get some kind of, I don't know, like a secret that's really high up, so you have to make some very tall vehicle. It's sad that you can't even see that in the game, because it would be cool to replay these levels in different ways. Yet because they didn't even do that, you've got this really hollow experience. Just to go back to that level with the jet engines, to actually obtain or craft a jet engine, you had to get some plastic. And the way you do that is by simply walking over to a pre-made crane, picking up a block of plastic, and just putting it into this recycling bin. That's it. That is the scavenge for parts part of the game. Imagine if they had checkpoints. Imagine if you started with a limited amount of resources and you had to use that to create something just to get to the next checkpoint, but along the way there were other resources you could pick up. And with those resources, you could then add to your vehicle at that checkpoint to make it to the next checkpoint. Look, I know it's very easy to throw ideas out there without considering the scope, but when you start thinking about stuff like that, you start to see the missed opportunity here, and that's the annoying thing about it. Along the way on this course, I even got out of my car just to see what this little abandoned village was all about, and there was nothing here. I'm sure the scribbles on the floor meant something deep and meaningful to some kind of theory video. However, for the average player, the fact that there's nothing here just tells me that there's no point to ever explore ever again. Just get to the finish line and that's it. Aesthetically speaking, it's not a bad looking game, but going back to the mud not reacting to your presence, there's this weird disconnect with the ground. Sometimes you'll see dust being kicked up, and other times, like right here, you won't. It all feels quite inconsistent. It's got that quality to it that you'd expect from a low-budget indie game, not from a studio already this successful. One thing that surprised me a fair bit was the fact that they actually had some enemies and even 2 boss fights. At some point you'll unlock a cannon, and the level where you do that, you need to take out some lasers with it. What was cool about this is that it forced me into making some kind of artillery. Because the cannon doesn't aim on its own, you have to figure out a way to make it aim. So to do this, I used engines, and it was rewarding as hell to actually figure this out. In a level after this, I had to do a similar thing, but this time against drones that are pretty far away. So I took what I built before, added wheels to it, and there you go. I was clearing out drones before making it to the end. I like this because there's a clear threat that at least looks hard to get past, but unfortunately they didn't do too much with it. There was only 1 level with the lasers and 1 level with the drones. Other than that, it was just get to the end somehow. Now, the first boss fight was before you even get the cannon, and it's against the neighbor who's circling the arena in a train. He throws these explosives at you which you're supposed to dodge, but for some reason they do less damage than a bump in the road. I'm not kidding. I took more damage and lost one of my wheels going over this bump than sitting here with 3 explosives going off right on top of me. To beat the neighbor, you need to carry TNT to 3 different spots of the track, and that's basically it. It's not too difficult to engineer something for that or even to execute in the first place. It's pretty simple stuff, but nowhere near as simple or as wonky as the second boss fight, which is against this giant robot spider. First things first, the level prior to this has you avoiding the spider legs, and I just want you to hear this for a moment. They expect you to build something with that noise going on in the background constantly. And no, turning down SFX doesn't help, but turning down ambient does. For some reason. After this level, you get a cutscene introducing the big spider within this arena of these panels that, if you're on one of these panels whilst it's blue, you basically lose control of your vehicle. And the spider, if close enough, will crush you if you're not careful, let alone zap you with this laser. This is all very cool until the spider freaks out for whatever reason when you hit its legs with a rocket, or until you realize that you don't even need to go into the arena to fight it. If you want, you can just stay at the ramp and there you go. You beat the final boss, you beat the game. It also didn't help that when I started this level the first time, I spawned out of bounds. So yeah, you could see the quality really lacking in later levels, almost like they ran out of time and they had to just push this out the door. I think one of the biggest draws to this game is the sandbox mode, the ability just to mess about with your friends and explore this amusement park. Now, the sandbox mode is cool in the way that once you beat the game, you unlock a bunch of new stuff to mess about with, including these gyro jets that you can use to fly about the place. The sandbox level itself is interesting to explore for about 5 minutes until you realize that it's mostly open space with the only thing of substance to find being cubes of plastic scrap. Why obtain scrap when you've got all the resources you'd ever need to make anything you want? Well, it's because you can play this level with limited resources, so it actually makes sense to go out there and find these cubes of plastic so you can make jets. I understand the concept of setting a challenge for yourself, but this seems kind of pointless when clearly the fun is just making something dumb and messing about with it for a bit before logging off and moving on to something better. It's also annoying that considering you can fly around this place, if you go too high, you go into this dark fog, and it's the same if you kind of go into the forest. The game really doesn't want you to go out of bounds, and they use these towers to kind of like zap you and bring you back in. And all this does is make what is essentially quite a small level feel even smaller. Look, Hello Engineer is an inoffensively simple engineering game with some lovely set pieces and a good foundation. The saddest thing about this game is that it's in a state where you can easily point at it and say they just wanted to capitalize on the scrap mechanic hype, that this was just a cheap cash grab. I mean, it feels bare bones enough to justify that claim. To be fair, it's not hard to see how it could fit in the Hello Neighbor universe, but it's not really a Hello Neighbor game. There's no thrill, there's no chase to it. I mean, imagine actually having to scavenge for parts while avoiding the neighbor so you can escape in a vehicle that you put together with random junk. That to me would make more sense from an IP like this. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like, it shares it to more people. And of course, I'd like to say a massive thanks to all of the supporters, both on Patreon and here as members. The support you guys give has actually been helping to get these videos out a bit faster and also contribute to these little Unreal Engine scenes that I've been doing. Every supporter contributes to this pile of cans, so if you want to support that, go ahead. And on that note, a massive shout out to those who yield many cans. Gibbles by the Dozen, the Cuddly Bot, Negadan, the one with severed toes, Abby, the Meatly, Durham Trollfist, Basto, Ali.Lair, King Delirious, Bob the Bronto, Scotched Eggs, Big Ram, Grimber, LetterOpener.mp3, Julie, Roland Deshane, I Don't Fit Through Doorways, Borky Again, Jer, Pagos, and I will see you guys in the next one.